My name is thank you very much for joining our workshop today. Today's workshop will be led by Manny Stockman from Osage University Partners. Manny joined Osage University Partners in 2015, and at Osage, he's focusing on core technology areas across software, computing, and IoT. He's a board member and an observer at a few startups, including at our own IonQ. And prior to joining Osage, Manny was at Lockheed Martin, ATL, and Skunkworks. Manny holds a PhD from Princeton University in aerospace engineering and applied physics, and a BSc in mechanical engineering from Duke University, which we will not hold against him as Terps. So he lives in Philadelphia with his wife and two daughters. And thank you so much, Manny, for joining us today. Selecting a CEO for a startup is usually a very difficult topic for anybody, let alone for an academic entrepreneur. So thank you so much for walking us through logic and the methods that you use as a professional investor. So go ahead and just to let everybody know, today's workshop will be recorded. And however, please feel free to use the Q&A function to ask questions all throughout the presentation. I will stop Manny. If Manny doesn't see the question, I will stop him and ask him the question that you submitted, or you can also raise your hand and then we will be able to unmute you and you can ask the question using your microphone. So it's up to you. All right, so Manny, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Alla. Thanks to everyone that's joining the call. And I was going to make a joke about Duke basketball, but you beat me to it. And it's especially salient because I actually grew up in the Maryland area and as a Terp fan. And I remember going to my first basketball game with my brother when he was in college at University of Maryland. And then I went to the dark side. So thanks for not holding it against me. But Duke is a good team. So, we built this talk as an output of a lot of the conversations we have with groups like Alla's at universities who are trying to figure out the best way to start a company and the best team to put in front of it. Just a little bit of background on us. I don't want this to be about OUP, but we're a venture fund based in Philadelphia that exclusively invests our $600 million in capital over 3 funds, $600 million in capital into startups that have spun out of universities. So it's our only focus. It's what we live and breathe. We've been doing it since 2008. And there's a whole life science side of our team, along with the tech side that I operate on. And we are investing in startups that range from cybersecurity and enterprise software all the way through semi, photonics, robotics, and our investments in quantum computing. So we've seen thousands of deals, thousands of permutations of startups, and we've made mistakes and we've made successes, and we've made mistakes when we don't understand why. We made successes where we don't understand why. So this is kind of a collection of some of our best thoughts on what we've learned in the process of going through the companies we've worked with and those we have chosen not to work with. It's meant to be a really constructive talk. Really want participation from you all. Usually we give this in person. You'll see there's a poll I'll put up in a couple slides. We want questions being asked. So please use the Q&A and raise your hand or ask a question, and I will rely probably on Alla to derail me from when I'm talking, and we'll try and answer them. So I gave a quick background on myself. I was an engineer and scientist at Lockheed Martin after grad school, and I loved doing what I was doing, working on really kind of early stage science, and looked at this job with Osage, where I've been now for 5 years, as a way to have almost 1,000 different experiments going on at once, where startups are really now at the bleeding edge of bringing technology to market. It's no longer an easy short putt for industry like Lockheed or even Google or some of the new players to take really advanced technologies and bring them into the real world. And I think startups are filling that gap. And that's why I love what I'm doing now. So this whole talk is about you finding your CEO if you're thinking of starting a company. And I like to think of this as it's never too early to hire you're Steve Jobs. The hard part is finding that person. And the reason why it's important is because of all the non-technical aspects of running a company. And startups that come out of universities are often what I call tech push. They have a technology and they need to go find where to apply it. Most other startups across every single domain are requirements pull. They identify problems in the market and they use technologies at their fingertips to solve them. And university startups, as I said, come at it from a different angle. And that person who can identify where to fit it into the real world, but also still bring in some of the technical knowledge to resonate with the founding team is the key to unlocking the value of your research. CEOs and team, broadly speaking, is the single most common reason why we invest in a deal. And it's also the most prevalent reason why we do not invest in a deal. And when we are talking to the universities that we work with about the companies that are spinning out of the tech transfer organizations, we're almost always passing, as a rule, in venture capital. You're really doing very few deals, and you'll hear this very often mismatch. A tech transfer office thought the team was great. The professor thought the CEO they had found was fantastic, and we came at it and on the other side where we just didn't think it was a good enough hire and a good enough team to really make an investable opportunity. And so we created this talk to just sort of explain how we think about it and why it's important. Most of this talk is about what's important. I thought I'd just have a slide on how to actually find a CEO. So if you take what I said for granted that you need a CEO at some point, a lot of times it's not easy to find that person. And what we look for in the teams that we back, if there is no established CEO, is the interest in hiring the right person. And oftentimes the answer that's the most frustrating is when someone says, well, I don't know how to hire, I don't know how to find that type of person. I can't find Steve Jobs. And we want you to try. There's a level of judging startups, which is often just about how hard are you working? How scrappy are you? And can you figure stuff out? Can you have an asymmetric advantage in how you approach things? And so there's generally two things I think about when you're doing a CEO search. Organically is doing it yourself, leverage your network, come up with ways to connect to people that are likely to find you a strong candidate for a CEO or senior hire, and be the type of person that people want to help, and show your investors or the people that you'd like to invest in you that you have a network that works, because then it'll show that you'll be able to not just hire but also improve your sales and get the customers. Sometimes startups want to be stealthy, and I've never seen too much value in being stealthy myself, like in the startups we work with. And it also just makes recruiting hard. You want to be a startup that's well known. You don't necessarily want to drive too much marketing. It's expensive to do it, but you do want to be out in the scene and out in the world so that potential recruits come to you. And more often than not, I'm suggesting to startups to go hunt in the major leagues. And these are the companies that are like yours, hopefully not identical, but the companies that have been in the same sector and domain as you are, and see if you can poach some people from there. Talk to their C-suites, maybe talk to their VP of engineering, director level people at those companies and startups, and preferably startups, as we'll talk about soon, and see if you can hire some top talent from some top companies. And that's really, a key thing that we look for you to do when you're driving your own search. On the inorganic side, there's the ones that cost money, contingent and non-contingent recruiters. Contingent recruiters are the people that will ask you for a fee when they find someone for you. The non-contingent recruiters are usually the higher quality recruiters who ask for an upfront payment, and then they'll get some, 2/3 of the rest of their fee when they find someone for you. And then there's sometimes, in both cases, the hire has to work out for a year. Otherwise, you recoup some of the costs of the recruiter. Tech transfer offices oftentimes have a fleet of entrepreneurs that are just in the ecosystem looking for their next gig. And we've seen great successes where universities are at least able to get the interim CEO in place through the Tech Transfer Office Network for a startup. So please, definitely discuss some of your hiring needs with your Tech Transfer Office and see if they have anyone in mind. Lastly, the people that you accept money from to invest in your company should be adding value to you. And the most important thing they can be doing at the early days of your company is helping you with hiring and customers. On the hiring side, that's really one thing you should ask them when you're doing diligence on those investors who want to give you money is, have they helped companies with hiring before? Who are some of the entrepreneurs in their network that they might be able to connect with the startups that they work with? The chances it overlaps with your specific company might be small, but you want to know that they think about it, they build their network, and that they've done it before. Also, as you're raising, be open to the investors that are interested in your company. Maybe they're not giving strong signals of investing, but they like what you're doing, and they may have entrepreneurs in their bench, in their fleet, that they want to connect to startups. So just be open to bringing in the right talent and go after it through your network. So this talk is meant to be, as I mentioned, interactive, where we came up with this as a kind of a choose your own adventure of hiring a CEO for a company. And so ironically, this is about a quantum computing company, not because we invested in IonQ out of Maryland. This is not at all representative of IonQ, but it is representative of a tough problem that universities often face. So let's just kick it off. So Quantum Qubit is a new photonic quantum computing company that's building a machine. So they're going to build a box that is going to be orders of magnitude faster and more efficient at solving various compute problems than what we think of with classical computing. And I'm sure the audience has heard of quantum computing by now. 2 years ago when we created this talk, it was a little bit earlier, but just to make sure everyone understands, quantum computing is a way to process bits of information, pieces of information with qubits of information that exists in various states, not just ones or zeros, and it lets you solve a certain class of problems. Not all problems. Lots of healthy discussion as to whether they're useful problems still. So the market itself is a little bit unknown, but there's a strong appetite for things like chemical simulations, pharmaceutical modeling, logistics operations, optimization, and other applications that don't quite fit the mold of what is known today as a huge area for compute. So it's not going to be doing e-commerce or web serving. So I just wanted to lay the landscape there. So there's just a couple background points on the company. They expect to have a commercial product in 2 years. The company is going to have both hardware and software requirements. And during the next couple of years, they're going to have to establish close collaborations with corporations to drive applications in quantum computing. Because as I mentioned, there's not much known about really what is going to be a home run use case for a system like this, but also at what stage is the machine going to be relevant to various use cases. So it's early days in the world of quantum computing, as it is for this company. They need to raise $3 million now, and they are probably going to raise $20 million in a few years and several tens of million more in the future. There's a 3-person engineering team in place today that consists of the PI, the professor that founded the company. We see this type of deal often. Startups that have maybe 1 or 2 grad students from the professor's lab, the professor involved in the company, and for the most part, you could call it a technology in search of a market. So this was meant to be the interactive, choose your own adventure aspect of this, which we still, I think, will be able to do if we can get this poll working after I run through the slide. So we fictitiously came up with 4 candidates for us to discuss. Candidate A is an engineer who was at Broadcom, which is a major semiconductor company. He had 10 years of experience, and then he went to go work as a VP of product development at a networking startup that Cisco acquired for $200 million. Strong resume. It's good to see his startup experience, and he's been in industry. Candidate B was a 3-time successful entrepreneur who's built companies that have been acquired, went public, and are still operational. Candidate C was former GM at IBM's quantum computing group, which, if anyone doesn't know, they're probably the most advanced quantum computing corporate effort in the world, alongside Google's. And before that, he was a CTO of a server business unit at IBM, which is somewhat relevant if you kind of think of servers being a workhorse of high performance computing, which will be a place for quantum computing to land. And then the fourth candidate, candidate D, is the founding professor of this startup of quantum computing of this company. And he served as the CTO of a previous university spinout for 2 years in the resistive RAM memory space. So at this point, I think there's a question. I'll answer this one in a couple minutes and jump to that in a little bit. So let me hold off on that question. But at this point, Ala or Wendy, can we pull up the poll? Because I'd like everyone to just answer who they think would be which CEO would you choose based only on the information you have here. This is fun. You can see all the answers coming in. I don't know if anyone else, if I'm the only one that can see them. Right now, CEO B is winning. CEO A is coming close. CEO A is taking the lead. We have to do polls more often like this. All right, we've got 18. I think we're hitting convergence here, although 2 last votes could call it a tie. So CEO A has 9 of 18 votes. CEO B has 7 of 18 votes. CEO C has 2, and then CEO D, the professor, has 0. So CEO A is the winner here. And let's discuss what we would do next. So on paper, I often would look at CEO A as well as a great candidate, with CEO B coming very close. And the reality is you've got to go deeper. So let's go deeper. So candidate A, this is the one who came from industry, had a startup that was acquired for $200 million. This is where I'd love to ask the audience questions, but unfortunately, it's just too hard to do back and forth Q&A over Zoom. So,
Manny?
when you have someone that, yeah.
We could ask the audience to also submit their suggestions via chat. So if you would like,
sure.
you would like to chime in via chat, not the Q&A, that could be another option to make it more interactive.
Yeah, let's do it. We can try and see what happens. I'm not seeing the chat. Where'd it go? See Q&A.
Be right next to Q&A. Do you see it?
Yeah, I see it now.
Okay. And
so if any come in,
if somebody types in like this, you should be able to see it pop up.
Right.
All right. So sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, no problem. So, when you have people that come from industry, you really are wanting to drive in on, what was their rate of growth at the company they came from. And, in general, old corporate entities are very hard to get to the bottom of how successful someone is, but you do want to get a feel for, how often they were promoted, were they a top candidate, what are they leaving behind, and were they seen as a performer that was earmarked for growth in the company, and were they able to cover a lot of ground. So those are some of the types of questions would ask on his Broadcom experience. This will be a common theme that you'll hear me ask or me mention. Was his or her startup really a success? Did they make money for their investors? How much capital did they raise? Really getting to the bottom of that. Someone mentioned ask a candidate A about his product market fit experience. So was he able to take products and match them to a market? That is clearly the most important thing in a university startup that is really important in a CEO, and actually is what you would want to understand about what they were able to accomplish at Broadcom and their startup. Did the product scale in revenue? How fast did it grow? Were they there for it? Those are all really critical questions. Thanks for that. At the startup, VP of product development sounds like a significant title. And, when you're at a 10-person company though, there's not really many people below that person, and they might not necessarily even report to the CEO. So you do want to, get connected to the true C-suite of the startup. That's someone you're thinking of hiring, to ask their CEO, if they were not the CEO themselves, is how influential were they on the team? And you really want to do diligence on that. The other thing we often focus on is transitions. Why are they leaving? Like, some of these corporate jobs are very well paid. They have a great growth progression. And so you really just want to find out why they left. And if they give you an answer that's a little flaky, around, they didn't really see the technology transition happening, or they weren't being paid enough, you do want to get to the bottom of that, because corporate entities do have a way of rewarding their employees. What you're really looking for is someone that says they're leaving because they realize they had a passion to build. And that's just one of the key messages you want to hear about. The other, you do want to ask them, because this person, candidate A, has no experience with quantum. What did they do what did they do diligence on to get excited about the company? How did they, build interest in quantum computing? Are they curious people? Like, are they constantly researching the news and the competitive space, and get a feel for what drives them and what keeps them up at night, so that you know that they'll be what we think of as a constant learner. Are they really driving the company? Are they really listening to advice? And are they going to take your, even if they have domain expertise, are they going to take advice from others and use that to make their company better? On the leadership side, so these are all pretty basic. If they're a first-time CEO, which candidate A is, can they be a leader? How big was the team they manage? I think of the CEOs that we hire. It's unlikely we're always going to hire A+ CEOs. Hopefully, I'm hiring CEOs that are A- or better. But I like to think of the people that I end up resonating the most with as A- people who hire A+ people around them. So there's a lot of examples that we have of companies we've invested in, or companies we haven't, with first-time CEOs who were able to just hire, a punch above their weight, hire great people and surround themselves with great people to fill their own gaps. And so we really look for that skill set. So in candidate A, he's been in the industry long enough at Broadcom and at the startup where he should have a track record of hiring well. And you may even want to talk to some of the people he's hired. And this last bullet on here is the most important thing we think of from a leadership perspective. And it's not that hard to diligence. And it's, did candidate A's colleagues follow him to the startup he went to? So if he's a strong leader, people will want to work with him over and over and over again. And so when we see a CEO at a startup who has brought on 2, 3, senior candidates from senior hires from the previous companies he's worked with, whether or not those companies were successful, we like seeing that, because it shows that people enjoy working with them. And we'll make sure that we understand if that's a possibility, if the companies are still too young. So we do like to diligence former colleagues of the CEOs we're thinking of hiring. This last one's a little subjective, and you have to be careful, relying too much on it. But it's, are these people just that you're thinking of? Is candidate A, does he have natural talent and a force of nature personality that will drive into all the important areas of the company? And I think this maybe addresses one of the questions that came in over Q&A. So the question was, what are the key differences between a CEO and a VP of sales, and in terms of vision, capability, and experience? So the CEO is generally a visionary. You don't have to be a Steve Jobs type visionary, but you need to have just raw talent across so many different areas. You need to be excited about Excel and really like manipulating numbers. And you have to be able to go into a sales meeting and drive that close of a deal with a customer. You have to be able to jump into a technical discussion and have your technical team and engineering team respect what you're saying. And so that ability to be very multidisciplinary and love doing every aspect of the business is what separates a CEO from every other C-level person at a company. And that's, generally speaking, why it's very hard to have first-time entrepreneurs, professors, grad students, let's say, be involved as a CEO of a company early on. But it sometimes happens. Sometimes you see a very young CEO have just such raw talent and passion that he can compensate for his experience. Coming from, for Canada's perspective, it's, difficult to really understand, if you look at someone coming from a corporate environment, if they have demonstrated that passion. So it really just comes out of your interactions with them and your experience in the interview process. So that was candidate A. I already talked about being a listener, so I'll skip over that. So let's go to candidate B. This is just meant to uncover more truths. I think of venture as getting to the truth of deals, of people. And as a reminder, so candidate B is a 3 times successful entrepreneur in software, hardware, and medical devices. So not non-pure quantum computing efforts. One company went public, which is a big deal. Like going public in general is a very strong signal. One of the companies was acquired by Medtronic, which is a medical device company, and one company is still private. So on paper, candidate B is likely the strongest candidate. I think they were almost tied, so they were the second most voted contender. And for quantum computing, the only reasons he might not be is because he doesn't have any real experience in a corporate environment. But let's find out or doesn't have any corporate experience, which is really relevant to quantum. So let's dive deeper on candidate B. So what you would do is, because the interest in candidate B is mostly from his resume, you want to really understand what he's done in each of these roles and whether there was real success to match that resume line item. And in this example, the first company he founded 10 years ago, and it went public 5 years ago and trades at $1 billion. That's great. That's actually really impressive. That's really exciting. The medical device company was acquired by Medtronic for $80 million and raised $50 million. So $80 million sounds great, but doing that on $50 million raised is okay. Remember, venture's in the business of giving you $1 and you turning it into 10. So in this case, the math doesn't work perfectly. They would have had to, create $500 million off of the $50 million they raised to really be a knockout success. But it's still okay. Like, it's still, he didn't fail. I wouldn't call it a failure. The private company is funded, still active, funded by top tier investors, Sequoia and Excel. These are the types of funds that you want involved in your startup if you can get them. So that's a really great signal. He brought in a new CEO at around the Series B because they thought the company needed more domain expertise. So first dig, this candidate's looking really good. But what happens when you dig further? And this is, getting deeper, talking to people that worked with the company, really diving into the company itself. So it turns out candidate B was not at the company at the time of their IPO. He left 3 years before it. The number of times I talked to a CEO or an entrepreneur who says they were a part of a company that went public, or they founded a company that's now public, or they took the company public and there's this type of time gap, or it turns out it was kind of a penny stock. If they took the company public, it's really only worth $50 million right now. You really have to kind of listen for the terms and dive in to really understand the reality. Because those types of illusions and kind of, views of reality are different for different people, and people sometimes can cloud their success behind a veil of secrecy. And so ideally, in this situation, he would have said the company that he was first founded went public after he left. If it was the other side that I mentioned, where a public company, you took a company public and it's actually just not that valuable. So, I took a company public, it's trading at, $50 to $75 million market cap. We did it to get some liquidity for our investors. It wasn't a great success, but it was a good experience. It's a much better way to describe it than just saying he took a company public. Turns out the medical device company was bought out for $30 million up front, not 80. $50 million will be earned out over time. But as you all may know or may learn in the university startup world, especially in life science, these earnouts, these payments, they're called biobucks, these milestone payments, rarely come to full fruition. And the last one is the one that is surprising, that doesn't get quite, it's hard for them to message. So I don't blame, let's say, candidate B for not expressing this, but it turns out company B was still private. There were some issues at the company, and his top tier VCs pushed him out. And so a firm like ours, like many others, we work with other venture funds. It's rare that if you're have been backed by a high quality group of investors that we don't have a way of connecting them and finding the reality of it. And some of the ways that we often address that, and you all should too when you're interviewing someone like candidate B, is, if we were to fundraise, if you're to fundraise, would you go back to your former investors? So for this startup, this quantum computing startup, would the candidate go back to Sequoia and Excel? And oftentimes, you'll sense some hesitation, and that's a flag. So, as diligence candidate B, unfortunately, it came out, actually, the picture's not that rosy. So that's kind of the harsh reality of a lot of the candidates that are around university startups. It's modest successes, and lots of kind of middling middling entrepreneurs that present themselves as high quality entrepreneurs. We'll go in later as to how you make these decisions when nothing looks great. Candidate C, I'll try and cruise through these a little bit more quickly. So candidate C is a former general manager of a quantum computing effort at IBM. Turns out he has a really strong technical background on quantum computing. He's been at IBM for 30 years. And the quantum computing group at IBM is 250 people. And lastly, he expects a $300,000 a year salary from the startup after funding. So lots of good things here. The fact that he's deeply technical feels good for this type of startup. They're obviously going to have lots of technical hurdles. He's been in the industry. He's probably well connected to customers, and he's led a big team. This has some positives and negatives to it, though. So, corporate entrepreneurs, people who leave corporate environments to become an entrepreneur, if they've been there too long, they get sometimes too used to relying on the infrastructure of a corporate environment. So they don't necessarily have all the soft skills of running a startup and all the hard skills of doing all the work that it'll take for a CEO. There was a time where we hired a CEO into one of our companies who we thought was fantastic. A year in, it turned out he didn't like doing the books. He didn't like dealing with recruiting. He just wanted everything done for him. And it was an unfortunate reality that we didn't think about before we hired him. And somehow you've got to get to the bottom of have they become too corporate in their experience. On salary, $300K a year is a lot. So when we think of CEO salary, it has to be near the top of the company in terms of pay for the rest of the colleagues, but it doesn't have to be the top. The CEO, we want to be incentivized through equity. And as a quick reminder, equity is what gets paid out when your company exits, so when it gets acquired or goes public. And so you want the CEO to be aligned with investors in how he's going to generate a value creating event for himself. And we don't want his financial life to be made on the salary from the company. You want him to be thinking about, how can I turn this company into $1 billion company so that I can get paid out $100 million. And so the 300K salary here is, I'd say it's in general out of market. We target something like 150 to 225K per year for our CEO hires. It's enough that the person can make a living. Absolutely. Like it's still a great salary. They may be able to make more elsewhere, but that's not what they're in this for. They're in this to build a company. And so when you have entrepreneurs who tell you that they could stay at IBM and make more than what you're offering them, tell them to stay at IBM. They're not going to get more than a tenth or hundredths of a percent of that company. What you offer with a startup, when you're looking for an entrepreneur that can become a CEO, is you can offer options and ownership in your company, and that's where they should be thinking of getting value. Some CEOs take $0 in salary. We love that. Not everyone can do it, so we don't always suggest it. We want our CEOs to be comfortable, and some ask for a very high salary, and every so often there's a person who deserves that, and it's really just very case specific. So candidate D is the founding PI. So this is probably the most often scenario we see in evaluating university startups. And it's for good reason. So professors run groups, sometimes 5 students, sometimes 40 students. So they look like little mini enterprises. A lot of professors have entrepreneurial experience. They've been advisors at startups. They've built their own startups before. Candidate D was a CTO of a spin out for 2 years. And that's good experience. Maybe he knows the fundraising world. Maybe he has connections to his, to previous employees of his startup. When you dig deeper on candidate D, he's also got lots of industry connections. He's in the space of quantum computing. There's really no industry activity. Most of it's out of academics. And so he's probably has reached out to the Fortune 500 companies that could serve as early customers. Several of the professor's students want to get involved in the company, which is a good sign. There's definitely, I think for anyone in this call that's a grad student or postdoc now, there are professors that students just don't ever want to work with again after they finish. This one has a lot of students that want to come. The last one was a little interesting, and it's in that candidate D felt that he was forced out of his previous company when the new CEO was brought in. So he probably was the interim CEO at some point, and he's determined that this time it's going to be different, that this time he can really be the CEO. And oftentimes we hear, this along the lines of, hey, well, I've been, effectively raised $30 million in government grants, and I've run big teams. I really think I can be the CEO this time for the startup. And it's great to have that passion, but you have to really be careful of how they're messaging that, because you don't want the passion to be about running a company and glory. You want the passion to be about, getting to success. And it's very rare that you see, unfortunately, very rare that you hear a graduate student or a CEO, these kind of early, a graduate student or a professor who are the early CEOs say, I'll step aside for the right person, or I want to do what's best for the company. And that's what we want to hear when we talk to a non-professional CEO about their role in the future for the company. It's more often that they think they're the right person for the job. And the best CEOs, the ones that we've backed, the ones that have been there in the company for 5 or 10 years, still question every day whether someone else could do the job better. And that's what we love to hear about. Like, we love to hear that level of modesty with passion combined to do what's best for our investment or for the startup themselves, because those are the people that end up staying with the company anyway. If they end up shifting out of the CEO role, they'll move into a CTO role, director of strategy, chief science officer. There's always a role for the founders of the company. And sometimes I think there's this this incorrect perception of what VCs are in the business of. And we're not in the business of changing the CEO out. We want to invest in a company whose leadership is right for the time that we're investing. And so we rarely will invest assuming that we'll go into a CEO search right away. So it's about presenting that attitude and understanding that the investors are not there to push to change leadership that quickly. So I think that I think the next quick view is let me just make sure. Okay, a couple more slides. So in the reality of this experience in the quantum computing company that we fictitiously described here, the best situation, given the hair that came on from just discussing candidate A, if you remember, candidate A had some issues where he didn't really have a successful background. He was just kind of more as a general industry person. Candidate B, his resume really wasn't as interesting as it seemed on paper. Candidate C was just kind of an industry guy. Candidate D is a professor. We actually would go with candidate D in this position. I would. Everyone's different. And it's because at the stage of a quantum computing company, without really that amazing CEO, you do want someone that's experienced, has some connections to the industry, and is willing to step aside for the right person. So, the reality is none of these candidates are perfect. And what you have to be careful of is making a bad decision. So sometimes no decision is the best decision. And we'll get into that at the end. There's a question that just came in. For the CEO of a startup company, how much ownership is offered to the CEO besides the salary? So great question. We have a whole talk on this, on startup equity distribution for university startups. And it's difficult because professors and grad students, who are often the founders of a university spinout, have a very asymmetric relationship. Professors have put their life's work into the research, and graduate students have put 4 or 5 years of work into the body of research. And there's also obviously the strange political dynamic of the person may still be trying to write their dissertation. So equity is difficult. In general, there's some rules of thumb. So, equity should not be split equally. You want to incentivize past performance and reward future performance. This is the whole side of how you split up amongst graduate students, professors is not what I'll talk about here, but for a CEO, they should really, if it's really the long-term CEO of your company, they should, and they're around at the founding, you want to think of them as potentially owning 20 to 30% of the company at the early days. If they're coming in after you've raised a seed or Series A, there may be more at like a 10 or 15% ownership. So it's really healthy. It's a healthy amount of ownership that doesn't feel matched to all the research, all the work that the professors and grad students would put into the technology, but it is matched when you consider that equity is supposed to reward for past performance and incentivize future performance. And the CEO is going to be the leader of future performance. So you really need to reward him for that. Another question came in, does the compensation change based on the field? In life sciences and drug development specifically. And the answer is yes, it does. Life science typically is slightly higher in pay for CEO salaries from what I've noticed. We have a whole life science team that's doing drug development investments, and we've seen that those salaries are higher. There's also a lot more dilution that those CEOs face, given that some of these startups are raising $50 to $150, $200 million rounds. So, just recapping, time check for 15 minutes. There's lots of molds of successful entrepreneurs. There's definitely not just one. But the key thing is when you have candidates to consider, you really need to just peel the onion, dive deep, talk to a reference, talk to someone that's worked with the entrepreneur before, ask, go down the rabbit hole. Ask a reference if they have another reference. So oftentimes, obviously, a candidate's going to give you his very best references to call, and you want to find a negative reference. I want to read it. You want to find a negative reference on someone. We look for negative references when we're doing a deal, it's really strange. We feel weird when all the work we do in researching a startup is positive. You should feel strange if you are diligencing a potential, future hire if there's not a single shred of negative background on them. So you just want to find out what's going on. Make sure you track the track record of the entrepreneur. You want them to have some signs of success. If they're not a co-founder, you do want to hire for that background of success, because the single most important thing for a startup is leadership. The most important thing a leader can do is fundraise, and because that's the only way a startup really succeeds in certain sectors. And so you want them to be great fundraisers. The way you're a great fundraiser, oftentimes, is if you have a track record of success. So that's just really important for a startup. I think I mentioned this before. Make sure they surround themselves with great people if they don't have the experience that's relevant for your company. So make sure that they can surround themselves with high quality talent. And I just want to, I give these talks a lot, and the key thing that you want to say if you're the interim CEO, the interim leader of your company, or if you're hiring someone to be that person, is that they'll step aside later for the right person. They won't just, move out whenever you tell them to, but since they hopefully are great hirers themselves, they realize the importance of hiring someone who's great as well. Now, there's a question that just came in. I think for the percentage still stays 20 to 30% equity. I don't quite get, I did mention that the CEO that you bring in, if they're a high quality person, kind of meant to be a full couple of years non-interim position, just 20 to 30%. So they should definitely have 20 to 30% ownership of your company. Over time, that gets diluted. So when
Manny?
you fundraise, you do, yeah.
So I think this question is more for asking about for the life sciences industry. Does the percentage of equity stay the same? So you discussed the salary, and this is the equity. Does that stay the same? And since you also mentioned that they get diluted,
yeah,
that work.
It's my actual instinct is that it's not the case, because we often see in the life science world, 10, 20, $30 million fundraisers on $10 million valuations. And so when you do that, let's just run the example quickly. A $10 million raise on a $20 million valuation, has your company selling 66% of the company. And so everything that existed after the fund, everything that existed as founders, CEO, employees, has to then squeeze into a 33% bucket. And so I think that you'll find that the ownership of life science companies for founders and CEOs is just lower. But at the 0th day, where there's no equity investment coming in, if you're bringing in a high quality CEO, they should definitely own 20 to 30% of the company. Feel free to follow up with me on that over email. I can connect you with our life science team if it's something you want to understand better. They've just seen more cap tables of drug discovery companies.
Thank you, Manny. I'll connect April with you.
Sure. These are just meant to be a couple just descriptions of what makes for important characteristics. Not everyone has every single one of these features, but just some that I think are the most important for myself when I'm judging an entrepreneur that you should bring into your judgment of the entrepreneurs you want to bring into your university spin-out is this track record of success. So if you have not started a company yourself before, but you're a researcher that's got a great idea, the technology is probably strong. You probably are not that familiar with fundraising. They're probably, certain geographies that we invest in don't have the Silicon Valley ecosystem around them to drive the network of immediate VCs to talk to. You don't have a track record. And so this track record of success is really important when you hire your CEO or your kind of early leader. And as I mentioned before, dig in and make sure that track record is real. I think it's really important to have a mindset of being a continuous learner where you're able to accept input from others. And the reason why that's critical is because startups pivot. Like I'll take an example of a materials company we invested in. On day one, they were spinning out with metal organic framework technology, and they were going to sell into the hydrogen storage world. And 3 years later, they're selling these amazing gas tanks that sell for a very significant price premium to the semiconductor industry, nothing having to do with hydrogen. And so you want people that are able to learn and listen and judge from their successes and failures and take input from others and do what's best for the company. And I think the last one I'll mention is just hiring. Are they able to surround themselves with great people? Are they able to bring in top talent? And do they have a network to do that? The time and stage that you are at as a startup decides what type of CEO you need. There's a couple of common things that happen across all stages, from initial spin out to product development to commercialization. And that's that you need to be a strong recruiter and you need to be a strong fundraiser. Most professors and grad students are neither of those. So you can't necessarily hire if your only experience is running research programs. If you don't have a strong network, it's difficult to be a great fundraiser. And so the CEO has to have those features at all times. And because you'll always be fundraising, you'll always be hiring. And those are the things that are really important. But at different stages, at the early days, you need to be able to, the CEO that you think about bringing in needs to be able to work with the researchers, the inventors. They need to be technically strong generally to do that. They don't need to be in the weeds. You don't need to know the difference between quantum computing and simulated annealing, all these other approaches to it, but you need to have them appreciate the problem. At the middle stages, you want them to be really excellent product market fit gurus. This is something that someone asked earlier, and it's the most important thing that university startups struggle with. University startups usually don't fail because the technology didn't work. They usually fail because they've picked a product that was going into a market that turned out to be really difficult to sell to. So just because you have a product that you think will sell into a market doesn't mean it's good product market fit. If the market's not willing to pay you enough for it, if they're not willing to move fast enough at buying it, then you don't have good product market fit. And seeing thousands of these types of business models is the experience that you want your CEO to have so that they can judge what product market fit should mean for your company. They need to be great at sales. This is a key thing. You're not always going to have a full sales team at the early days, and so your CEO is often the one selling. That kind of feeds into commercialization. So, the top two rows here, the CEOs we back, we like to think they can cut across all of these categories. And so you're really looking for someone that's a unicorn, him or herself. And you need the person to have several of these capabilities. You can't always get that. That's the harsh reality. But so you do want to solve for the time that you're currently working as a company when you're looking at hiring someone. In the spirit of time, be really scrappy with how you diligence candidates. Go onto LinkedIn, find common acquaintances, call their former investors, make sure you look at their past companies. It's on the surface, Crunchbase can give you some information, but make sure you look at things like PitchBook or other venture sources to find out how much money they've raised, how large the exit was, research the news. Send me an email if you want some background on certain startups the person has worked for. Maybe your tech transfer office can help as well. And I think I mentioned before, use your candidates' references to get to other references. One other thing I want to mention on this is when you ask questions, don't lead the person on the phone to the answer you want. Ask open-ended questions. So, if the company was, let's think about if some company exits the entrepreneur worked at before, you wouldn't say, really felt like the startup he was at was successful. How do you think he got to be so successful there? You really want to start with saying, was that startup that he worked at a success? What were your views of the startup? Don't lead the horse to water. You want the reference to just talk. You should not be the one asking lots of questions on these. You want to let the reference talk often and make sure you leave pauses in the conversation to let the person expound upon their thoughts. I think we kind of hit a lot of these characteristics in the general discussion. As I mentioned, that communication side of this is really important. You want the CEO to be able to drive both internal conversations and communicate well with the investors of the company and the potential investors of the company. So this is something I just want to leave here. So when no CEO is available, what do you do? There's a couple options. You can hire a less than perfect CEO. You can hire an interim outside CEO. You could have the academic founder be the interim CEO, basically a PI or a grad student be the CEO, or have no CEO. I just want to quickly go through these. The less than perfect CEO is the worst scenario because it's so hard to change that person out. And it's the same with the interim CEO. So you may not be giving him or her the full title, but you're giving them a title of CEO, and they're coming from the outside. So you don't have that level of communication where you could say to a co-founder, hey, this isn't working. Let's just change the roles. We're still going to all be co-founders, but we really need to find a new CEO. So hiring anyone in from the outside is a big commitment, especially with a CEO title. I like to think of the last two as the best options. When I see a company with no CEO, I ultimately want to find out who the decision maker is. So I need there to be some clarity. It doesn't have to be on paper that they're the interim CEO, but I do want to make sure that there's a person that is leading the discussion and leading the charge. When you have three people that are all co-founders with no CEOs or are titled co-CEO, which happens surprisingly often, I worry about decision making. And so the best option, I think, in general, is to have the third one, which is the academic founder being the interim CEO. And sometimes the side of that can get supplemented by a COO or a VP of product who's not good enough to be the CEO, but they can kind of help with strategy is important, where it's not everything is very technical. So, when as an academic founder, as interim CEO, it's only okay when they recognize that they'll step aside for the right person and when they filled the gaps around them. Who's the person that's going to listen to conversations with customers and identify potential product market fit? So that's all I had for today. I'm happy to answer questions now. I know there's not much time left, but I really liked the way we did the poll and the questions that came in. Anyway, feel free to email me here with any questions you have, and I can share the slides afterwards if anyone wants them. But I got a couple more minutes now if anyone wants to ask me.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic presentation, and I wish I could highlight somehow visually some of the key things that you said about why university startups fail and why they don't fail. So does anybody have any questions?
At this time, I would like to interject while we're waiting for questions. I would like to introduce our poll so we can get your feedback.
Thank you, Wendy.
You're welcome.
So while you're answering the question, while you're filling out the poll, I do believe we have one question: if there's a conflict of interest for a professor to be the CEO.
The question that came in. Sorry, I'm missing it.
Yeah.
Ala, you might be the best to answer that because there's a legal conflict of interest with universities and the way they're set up, and every university is a snowflake in how they handle COI. I'll just say, in general, no, there's no conflict of interest from a non-legal perspective. It just comes down to whether he or she are the right person to be the CEO in our mind. But Ala has a more formal approach.
So from the university's perspective, there could be potential conflicts, but those are the kind of conflicts that we like to see, and we're happy to help you manage. We actually had a workshop last week just on this specific topic, and we have a recording available from that. I'm happy to share with you, but basically there could be potential conflicts, but they're manageable and the university welcomes them. I think the word conflict is wrong, but it's, yes, so, and I'm happy to share the workshop on that. I think we have chat.
And I've got to jump for another phone call, so I have to run. Thank you, everyone, for joining the call. And like I said, feel free to shoot me an email, set up a time to talk. I'm always happy. I think my calendar is available on my biography page on my website.
Thank you so much, Manny. This has been very, very informative.
Thank you. Bye.
Fantastic talk as always. Thank you. And thank you to everybody who joined us today as well. We will be sharing the slides and this has been recorded. So once it's posted on YouTube, we will also share, you can check our channel on YouTube. It's called Startup UMD YouTube channel. You can check recordings from this workshop and other workshops. Thank you very much to everybody. And thank you, Wendy, for setting this up.
You're welcome, Ala. Bye, everyone.